Just after midnight on the 3rd of January 2020, two vehicles pulled away from the terminal at Baghdad International Airport and turned onto the access road. In the second car sat Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Quds force and, by most reckonings, the second most consequential man in his country. Above him, the sky was empty, not quiet, empty. Nothing to see and nothing to hear. There was, in fact, an aircraft up there. It had a 66-foot wingspan, a single propeller turning at the back of a slender gray fuselage, and a sensor ball under its nose the size of a beach ball, staring down at the road. It had been circling for hours. It was being flown by two people sitting in a windowless trailer in the Nevada desert, more than 7,000 miles away, watching the convoy on a screen through a satellite link. When the order came, the missiles came off the rails and down through the dark, and the road was suddenly on fire. That was the MQ-9 Reaper, at the absolute peak of its reputation. The silent hand, the eye that never blinked, an aircraft that could hunt a man for a day and a night and kill him in the last minute of that watch, and whose crew would then finish their shift, get in the car, and drive home to dinner. Now move forward 5 years and about 1,100 miles south to a dirt road in Marib Governorate, Yemen. A pickup truck is moving slowly through a crowd of men. On the flatbed is a torn section of composite wing. Dirty, cracked, unmistakably not local. Someone films it up close and the camera holds on the stencilled lettering along the skin. General Atomics, San Diego, California. The men around that truck do not have an air force. They do not have radar networks or fighter squadrons or a defense budget. 10 years earlier, they had almost nothing that could reach 20,000 feet. And over roughly 18 months, they took the American Reaper down again and again and again by the Pentagon's own reluctant admission at least 15 times, and by their own count, more than 20. So here's the question this whole video exists to answer. Between that airport road in Baghdad and that pickup truck in Marib, something broke. Was it the aircraft? Or was it the sky? Keep the stencilled lettering on that wing in your head. We are going to come back to it, and by the end it is going to mean something completely different. To understand how strange the Yemen story is, you have to understand what the Reaper was before it got there. Because for most of its life, it was not really thought of as a combat aircraft at all. It was thought of as a certainty. The MQ-9 entered service with the United States Air Force in October of 2007, built by General Atomics Aeronautical Systems in California. Its predecessor, the Predator, had been a surveillance aircraft that people eventually bolted missiles onto. The Reaper was the other way round. It was designed from the start as a hunter-killer. Bigger, faster, higher flying, with the payload to carry laser-guided bombs as well as missiles, and the endurance to stay over a target long past the point where a manned aircraft would have to go home. And in the wars it was built for, it was close to unanswerable. Over Afghanistan, over Iraq, over Syria, over Libya, over Somalia, over Yemen itself, the Reaper flew thousands of strikes across nearly 2 decades. It flew in skies where nobody was shooting back at 25,000 feet, because nobody in those skies had anything that could reach 25,000 feet. One account of the platform's early years claims it accumulated close to 1 million flight hours between 2007 and 2017 without a single combat loss. And I want to flag that figure because it comes from a single outlet, and I have not been able to corroborate it independently. Treat it as illustrative rather than as a hard number. But the shape of it is right. For most of a decade, the Reaper's principal enemies were weather, mechanical failure, and pilot fatigue. That is the reputation the Soleimani strike sealed. On the 3rd of January 2020, an MQ-9 is reportedly launched from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and flown by a crew at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, killed the most heavily protected military figure in Iran and the deputy commander of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces. On a road, from the air, with no warning and no risk to a single American life. Think what that says to an Air Force. Here is a machine that can loiter over a foreign capital for a full day, identify a specific man in a specific car, and remove him. And if it is lost, you write a check. You do not write a letter to a family. That is not a weapon. That is a policy instrument. By September of 2024, the Air Force held around 230 Reapers, the bulk of the American fleet, flown by Air Combat Command, Air Force Special Operations Command, the Air National Guard, and the Reserve, with more in the hands of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Marine Corps. Britain flew it. France flew it. Italy and Spain flew it. Poland leased it. India approved a purchase of 31 of the naval variant. It had become the standard by which the entire category was judged. And then it went to Yemen, and within 18 months, the Air Force was publicly telling Congress it needed a replacement that was cheap enough to lose. To see why the sky over Yemen mattered so much, you need to understand what the Reaper actually is as a machine, because almost everything people assume about it is wrong. The engine. The Reaper is not a jet. It is powered by a single Honeywell turboprop of roughly 900 shaft horsepower, driving a pusher propeller at the tail. That is in the same broad power class as a small business turboprop, the kind of aircraft that flies short regional hops. Its cruising speed is around 230 miles an hour. A 1940s piston fighter would run it down. It has a 66-foot wingspan on a fuselage that weighs, empty, about as much as a large pickup truck. It is not fast, it is not agile, and it is not stealthy. What it is efficient. Long, thin wings, a small, thrifty engine, and the ability to stay airborne for something on the order of 24 to 27 hours when it is lightly loaded, less when it is hung with weapons. Then there is the thing it exists to carry. Under the nose sits the Multi-Spectral Targeting System, a stabilized turret combining infrared imaging, daylight television, image-intensified low-light television, and a laser designator. That ball is the point of the entire aircraft. Everything else, the wing, the engine, the fuel, the satellite antenna, and the bulbous nose, exists to hold that camera in the sky above a piece of ground for a very long time and keep it steady. The weapons are almost an afterthought by comparison. Typically Hellfire missiles on the inboard pylons and laser-guided or satellite-guided bombs when the mission calls for something heavier. And then there is the part that still sounds like science fiction, even though it has been routine for 20 years. The Reaper is flown by a two-person crew, a rated pilot and an enlisted sensor operator, sitting side by side in a ground control station that is, physically, a shipping container full of screens. For most missions, the aircraft is launched and recovered by a small team in theater, and then control is handed over a satellite link to a crew in the continental United States, usually in Nevada. That is called remote split operations, and it is why the man watching the Baghdad Airport road was in the Mojave Desert. The cost of that arrangement is a delay. Every control input has to climb to a satellite and come back down, and the round trip takes on the order of a second and a bit. For a surveillance orbit, that does not matter at all. The autopilot handles the flying. The crew mostly manages the sensor and the plan. But hold that thought. 1.2 seconds of lag, no ability to see behind you, no radar warning receiver of the kind a fighter pilot relies on, no ejection seat, no evasive energy, a cruise speed slower than a 1950s airliner, and an airframe about as visible to radar as a light aircraft. In an empty sky, none of that is a weakness. Every one of those things is a design choice that buys endurance, and endurance is the whole product. In a sky where somebody is shooting, every one of those choices becomes a liability at the same time. The first sign came before Yemen, and it came from a pier. On the 9th of March, 2023, over international waters in the Black Sea, a pair of Russian Su-27 fighters intercepted a United States Air Force Reaper. They dumped fuel across it in a series of passes, and then one of them clipped the Reaper's propeller. American operators, with the aircraft no longer flyable, put it into the water. European command called the intercept unsafe and unprofessional. General Mark Milley later said recovery from 4,000 or 5,000 feet of water was unlikely, and that mitigating measures had been taken so that whatever had been of value on board no longer was. A fighter had to physically touch it to bring it down, which sounds like a story about Russian recklessness, and it was. But look at it from the other direction. Met an actual Air Force in an actual contested sky and had no answer whatsoever. It could not run, it could not maneuver, it could not see the threat coming, and it could not defend itself. It could only be there until somebody decided it should not be. Over Libya between 2019 and 2022, at least 2 American Reapers and 1 Italian one were lost, most likely to Panzer air defense systems reportedly operated by Russian contractors. That was the second warning. You did not need a national air force to kill this aircraft. You needed one truck with a radar and missiles on it. And then the Red Sea crisis began, and the warnings stopped being warnings. The 8th of November, 2023, an MQ-9 goes down off the coast of Yemen. A senior American official confirms it was shot down by Houthi forces in international airspace. The Houthis publish video. the 19th of February 2024. Another one near Hodeidah on the Red Sea coast. This time the confirmation comes from the podium. Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh says the initial indications are that it was brought down by a Houthi surface-to-air missile. The 25th of April, 2024, the 3rd. And this is where the campaign stops being a series of press statements and becomes something you can watch. It is night over Marib. The footage is grainy, monochrome, shot through an electro-optical sight, and the frame is drifting the way a hand-cranked tracking mount drifts. There is a shape in the middle of it. Not a dot. A recognizable aircraft, wings and tail plainly visible, sliding across the crosshairs while the operator hunts it back into the center. It is not maneuvering. It is not aware. It is flying a smooth, patient, economical orbit, exactly as designed, because as far as its crew in Nevada knows, there is nothing down there that can touch them. Then the frame washes out white as the missile leaves the rail. There is no radar warning tone in the ground control station in Nevada, because there is nothing to warn about. A great many of the Houthi engagements are cued optically and by passive infrared, which means no radar is illuminating the target, which means the classic warning that a manned pilot would rely on never happens. The crew's first indication that anything is wrong is the same as their last. The picture stops, and in daylight the Houthis go and find the pieces, and they film them. And there on the shattered composite is the stencilled lettering, General Atomics. The 17th of May, 2024, the 4th. September the 8th and the 9th by Houthi count, over Marib and Sada. The 2nd of October, 2024, Central Command itself states that the Houthis downed an MQ-9 over Sinai. December, over Al-Baida. New Year's Day of 2025, over Marib again. Early March 2025, an American official tells the press that the Air Force lost contact with a Reaper over the Red Sea, roughly one a month for well over a year, against the most experienced armed drone operator on Earth. And then came March of 2025, where it stopped being an attrition problem and became something the Pentagon could not talk its way around. On the 9th of March 2025, the United States launched a substantially expanded air campaign against the Houthis. The plan, as later described by American officials to CNN, was to achieve air superiority over Yemen inside about 30 days, and then move to a second phase. Persistent overhead surveillance, hunting senior Houthi leadership from the air. The platform that phase depended on, the platform that had made that kind of patient manhunting possible in the first place, was the Reaper. Then this happened. The 31st of March, the 3rd of April, the 9th of April, the 13th, the 18th, the 19th, the 22nd. 7 aircraft in 6 weeks. Those specific dates were given to the Associated Press by defense officials, which makes them about as solid as anything in this story gets. And at roughly $30 million in airframe, that cluster alone represents more than $200 million of American hardware falling into Yemen inside a month and a half. Central Command's response was that the increased losses were partly a function of a higher operational tempo, which is true as far as it goes. More flying hours mean more exposure. But the officials talking to CNN were blunter about the consequence. The second phase of the campaign was being hampered, because the aircraft best suited to conduct persistent surveillance kept getting shot down, and the Houthis were getting better at targeting them. With no American troops on the ground, losing the overhead orbits meant losing the ability to see what the strikes had actually accomplished. That is the sentence that should stop you. The United States was not losing an air campaign. It was going blind in one. If you are the kind of viewer who wants the record with the sourcing attached rather than the version that comes with a flag attached, subscribe. That is the whole reason this channel exists. Now back to Yemen, because we still have not answered the obvious question. So what exactly was doing this? Not a modern integrated air defense system. Not S-300s. The Houthi kit is a hybrid. Old Soviet inventory left over from the Yemeni state. Rebuilt, re-engineered with Iranian help, plus Iranian designs delivered by sea. Central Command attributed one early shootdown, back in 2019, to a modified SA-6, a 1960s Soviet system dragged back to life. The Houthis have since displayed the Bark 1 and Bark 2, unveiled in September of 2023, and derived from Iran's Tair family, and they claim engagement ranges around 50 and 70 kilometers and ceilings up to 15 or 20 kilometers. I will say clearly what the Warzone's Joseph Trevithick said about those numbers. There does not appear to be any independent confirmation of them. They are the manufacturer's claim. And the manufacturer in this case is a belligerent, but the genuinely strange one, the one that best explains the whole story, is a weapon the West knows only by a number, the 358. The 358 is an Iranian anti-aircraft missile that does not behave like an anti-aircraft missile. It has small wings and a tiny turbojet, and instead of sitting on a launcher waiting for a target to appear, it launches and then loiters. It cruises around a patch of sky up to about 8,500 meters for as long as its fuel lasts hunting. Published figures give it a loiter range of around 100 kilometers, a top speed around 700 kilometers an hour, a total weight of 58 kilograms, and a warhead of 10 kilograms of high explosive. Read those numbers again. 58 kilograms, lighter than the average adult. A 10-kilogram warhead, a fraction of what a conventional surface-to-air missile carries. Built, according to American analysis, substantially from commercial off-the-shelf components. The United States Navy has been seizing them from Iranian arms shipments bound for Yemen since around 2019. It is not a fast missile. It could not touch a fighter jet. It does not need to be fast because it is not hunting fighter jets. It is hunting something that flies at 230 miles an hour in a predictable circle for 20 hours at a stretch and cannot see it coming. Somebody in Iran looked at the American Reaper, looked very carefully at what it actually is rather than at its reputation, and built a cheap flying object specifically shaped around its weaknesses. And it worked. Now for the part where the numbers stop agreeing with each other, because this is where most coverage of Yemen quietly picks a side, and I am not going to. The Houthi claim is the ceiling. The Atlantic Council's Leonardo Mazzucco reported in February of 2025 that since November 2023, the Houthis had claimed 14 Reapers, mostly over Marib and Sada. By April of 2025, tallies attributed to the Houthis and cited by the war zone had reached 22, with Houthi-aligned media running as high as 26. These are claims by a party to the war whose military spokesman announces them, and they should be read exactly that way. The Atlantic Council itself notes such claims warrant skepticism, and the Houthis have made claims in other domains, including claims about striking American aircraft carriers, that Central Command flatly rebutted. The American floor is the other end. BC News reported in April of 2025 that at least 15 Reapers had been brought down by the Houthis since October 2023. That figure is built from incidents individually confirmed by American officials, the podium confirmations, the Central Command statements, the 7 dated losses given to the Associated Press. And what is the official American total? There isn't one. In September of 2024, Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder responded to a Houthi claim of 10 downed Reapers by saying it was not accurate, and then declined to give a number, citing operational security. So the honest state of the record is this: the United States acknowledges at least 15 while refusing to publish a running total. The Houthis claim between 22 and 26 with no independent verification. The truth almost certainly sits inside that band, closer to the confirmed floor than the claimed ceiling. And the reason we cannot go it further is that one side has an incentive to inflate, and the other has chosen silence. When somebody quotes you a precise figure for how many Reapers Yemen has eaten, ask them which of those two sources they trusted. Run the money through the same discipline. Even the price of the aircraft is contested, and not because anyone is lying, because different figures count different things. The Associated Press and CBS both use about $30 million each. A Congressional Research Service estimate lands near $28 million. The Pentagon's own acquisition reporting in base year 2008 dollars puts average procurement unit cost around $26.6 million, and flyaway cost lower still. And the $56.5 million figure you will see quoted on Air Force fact sheets is not one aircraft at all. It is a 4-aircraft system, including the sensors, the ground control station, and the satellite link. Divide it properly, and the air vehicle share is about $14 million. So the aggregate is a range, not a number. 15 confirmed losses at roughly $30 million each is about $450 million in airframes. Take the Houthi claims at face value, and you pass $500 million. Is a great deal of money, and either way, the interceptor that killed each one cost a rounding error of it. If you have flown this aircraft, maintained it, or sat in a ground control station watching a feed cut out and not knowing why for the next 12 hours, I would rather hear from you than from another analyst. Put it in the comments. The record on this campaign is still being assembled, and the people who were actually on the link know things the reporting does not. There is one more detail from Yemen that I cannot leave out, because it is the part that tells you the loss was never only financial. The Houthis did not just parade the wreckage. They wrote a song about the Reaper, a mocking one, nicknaming it with a local slang word meaning roughly useless. An aircraft that killed the commander of the Quds force from 7,000 miles away became, in Yemeni popular culture, a punchline. And here is the sober version of what that means. Noted by the Atlantic Council, every one of those downed airframes is also an intelligence opportunity. Wreckage can be handed to Iran, to Russia, to China. The sensor turret, the data link hardware, the composite structures. Iran spent considerable covering an American drone over the Strait of Hormuz in 2019 for exactly that reason. Some of the cost of Yemen is not on any balance sheet yet. Now let me preempt the sharpest comment on this video because it is a fair one. Yes, the Reaper was never designed to survive contested airspace. That was explicit. It is a slow, unstealthy, unarmored surveillance platform built for permissive skies, and criticizing it for dying in a defended one is like criticizing a delivery van for losing a race. That is exactly the point, and it is not a loophole. Because the American way of war spent 20 years quietly assuming that permissive airspace was the normal condition, and built a 230 aircraft fleet, a whole career field, and an entire targeting doctrine on top of that assumption. Yemen did not prove that the Reaper is a bad aircraft. Yemen proved that the assumption had an expiry date, and that the expiry date arrived not against China or Russia, but against a non-state movement with Iranian shipping containers. Some people said so early. Back in 2013, General Mike Hostage, then commanding Air Combat Command, said publicly that these medium-altitude drones were useless in a contested environment, and that they would be vulnerable even to countries with the most minimal air forces. That was 12 years before Marib, and it was dismissed at the time as an old fighter pilot being sniffy about the new thing. He was right. And the institutional response since has been unusually candid. Robert Tallest of the Royal United Services Institute, writing in April of 2025, put the lesson plainly. Even in airspace above non-state actors, this class of drone lacks survivability. He argued that persistent surveillance is only valuable if the platform providing it can stay alive, and that Britain, which flies the same family of aircraft, needs to look at alternatives. And he identified the actual metric that matters, which I think is the single most useful line in this entire debate. A drone can be expendable, but only if it is cheaper than what is destroying it. That is the failure in one sentence. Not that the Reaper died, that it died expensively. Jennifer Kavanagh of Defense Priorities has gone further, arguing that the platform proved essentially non-survivable in the Middle East, and that this should raise real questions about its usefulness in a major power war, though I will flag that her assessment folds in later losses beyond Yemen, which we will get to. Industry split predictably along its interests. Brandon Seng of Shield AI, who sells alternatives, called the Reaper too expensive and too slow to regenerate to keep operating inside surface-to-air missile range. General Atomics spokesman countered that attrition is built into the Air Force's order scheme in the first place, and that some loss is expected. Both of those statements are self-serving. Both of them are also partly true, which is what makes this interesting rather than simple. So here is the verdict, and it is narrower than the headlines. The MQ-9 Reaper is not obsolete. In a permissive sky, it remains one of the most effective military instruments ever fielded. Nearly 2 decades of persistent surveillance and precision strike at zero risk to aircrew, culminating in an operation that killed one of the most protected men in the Middle East on a public road. Nothing about Yemen undoes that. What Yemen did was expose that the Reaper's dominance was never really a property of the aircraft. It was a property of the environment, and 3 things decided it. First, the design trade. Every choice that made the Reaper extraordinary at endurance, the low speed, the big efficient wing, the small engine, the absence of stealth, armor, evasion, or aircrew protection, is the same choice that makes it defenseless. There is no version of this aircraft that is both a 27-hour orbiter and a survivor. You get one. Second, the threat got cheap. It used to take a state to kill something at 25,000 feet. It now takes a shipping container and a design that costs a fraction of the target, flown by a movement that does not need to win the air. It only needs to make the American orbit unaffordable. Third, And this is the one that actually hurts. The cost exchange ran the wrong way, and the fleet cannot be replaced. Air Force procurement of the MQ-9A ended with the final buy in 2020, and the production line closed in 2025. So every one of those airframes over Marib was, in the strictest sense, irreplaceable. You cannot order more. That is not attrition. That is a fleet being spent. And that is why the reckoning did not stay a debate. It became a requirement. In May of 2026, Lieutenant General Christopher Niemi of Air Force Futures told the Senate Armed Services Committee that the Reaper's replacement had to be more flexible, mass-producible, and usable in a more attritable way, noting that a Reaper can run up to $50 million a copy depending on what you count. Air Force Futures has validated requirements for an MQ-9 next. In parallel, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program is targeting roughly $25 to $30 million per aircraft for something that is actually survivable, with 2 prototypes flown in 2025 and combined funding for financial year 2026 above $800 million. Read that back. The Air Force's answer to losing a $30 million drone is a jet at roughly the same price that can survive, and a longer-term ambition for something cheap enough that losing it is a line item rather than a news story. The Reaper's real successor is not a better Reaper. It is a different bargain. Where does that leave the aircraft itself right now? Still flying and still selling. The Air Force retains well over 150 of them in inventory out of a total production run in the low 300s. Britain has moved to the Protector, the newer certified derivative of the same lineage. Poland is leasing them and ordered more in December of 2024. India approved 31 of the maritime variant. Belgium, Canada, Italy, Spain, France, and Taiwan are all in the family. For coast watching, for counter-piracy, for border surveillance, for maritime patrol, for any mission where nobody is shooting upward, the Reaper is still the most cost-effective set of eyes anyone has ever put in the sky, and it will be flying into the 2030s. And there is an epilogue I have to mention with heavy caveats. During the 2026 conflict with Iran, reporting citing anonymous American officials and Iranian claims suggested that as many as 24 Reapers may have been lost in that campaign, a figure that, if accurate, would exceed the platform's entire previous combat loss history. I am flagging it rather than leaning on it, because it rests on exactly the kind of sourcing this channel refuses to launder into fact. Unnamed officials on one side, a belligerent's claim on the other, and no published total. If it is independently confirmed, Yemen stops being the reckoning and becomes the rehearsal. That is the honest state of it today. Which brings us back to the stencil on the wreckage in Marib. General Atomics, San Diego, California. When that lettering rolled off a printer in a factory in California, it was a manufacturer's mark on the most feared surveillance aircraft in the world. The machine that could sit above a foreign capital for a day and take a man off a road. By the time it was filmed on the back of a pickup truck in Yemen, it had become something else entirely. A receipt, $30 million, itemized, in a language the men filming it could not read, for an aircraft brought down by a 58-kilogram missile built out of commercial parts. The Reaper did not fail. It was simply asked for the first time to fly somewhere that shot back. And the answer it gave was the answer it had always been going to give, because it was in the design from the very first drawing. The world just took 18 years to ask the question, so tell me where you rank it. Is the Reaper one of the most successful combat aircraft of the modern era that finally met its limit? Or a platform whose reputation was always borrowed from the weakness of its enemies? Make the case in the comments and bring the evidence, because that argument is genuinely unsettled. Subscribe to Combat Proven. The next system is already in the queue.